Meantime, another poll has pointed out that the Prime Minister is on the wrong side of history when it comes to actually dealing with the economic crisis that many Australians are feeling and feeling each and every day. This got lost in much of the October 7 coverage. We mentioned it briefly last night, but it shows that 52% of Australians believe that the person and people and organisation who has most responsibility for dealing with inflation is not the Reserve Bank. That's just 29% of people. These are the hardcore lefties. Instead, the majority of the country, 52%, says that it is the federal government and specifically the Treasurer. Now, because the Prime Minister and the Treasurer have actually failed to deal with how much money they keep pumping into the economy via increased spending, including, yes, increased welfare spending, the Reserve Bank has made the decision 12 times since Jim Chalmers became the Treasurer of Australia and Albanese became the Prime Minister to raise interest rates. Well, today we started to see some of the working documents behind their decision not to increase, but more importantly, not to cut interest rates at their meeting a couple of weeks ago. The board minutes, they make it very clear that the Reserve Bank's message that is not ruling in or out a hike or a cut is set against the diagnosis of a decidedly weak economy, according to the minutes of the discussion that took place. So there is still a potential here of a rate rise rather than a further rate pause or rate cut. Further financial conditions might need to be even tighter or looser at the present to achieve the board's objectives. Remember, the board's objectives is to get inflation consistently back between 2% and 3%. It is currently below 3%, but that is because of millions of dollars being spent by the government to artificially drop the prices of power and therefore to, frankly, buy an inflation result. The Reserve Bank is waiting to see what happens about the real inflation result. Meantime, economists are suggesting that there will be a rate cut and it most likely will happen before the next federal election. Now, again, as we've said, the orthodox thinking in Canberra is that if it goes up before the election, the government's going to be in a world of trouble. But I've got some breaking news for some of these people. 12 interest rate rises has created a huge amount of pain for millions of Australians. A third of Australians that are paying off a house, and presumably most of the third that are renting are in a house that is being paid off by somebody else. Even if there is a 1/4 or 0.5% increase, we will still be dealing with generation high interest rates. So don't fall for what is about to be the media spin, which is, well, inflation is going down. No, prices are still going up. The speed with which they are going up may well be slightly changing. And secondly, if there is a reduction in interest rates, that's good, obviously, for everyone who's paying things off. But because there's been 12 of them, that's the damage that needs to be put right. It needs to go down 6 times before people are going to start to notice any sort of relief. And as I've shown you before, again, let's deal with the data and then we can put the opinion on top of it. There is a huge explosion in the amount of money that people are having to spend to pay off their mortgages right now. In fact, the average homeowners overall are now paying $5 billion more than they were a couple of years ago to actually pay off their mortgages. This means there's been a 61% increase in the total amount of money that people have had to find to pay back interest rates since this Prime Minister and this Treasurer took over. So, yes, any cut will be great, but it's because it's a signal that it's not going to get worse. Any rate cut, while accepted and celebrated, will not get the government off the hook because the effective financial pain has been 12 rate rises in the making. Bring it down by 1, bring it down by 2, OK, that's better. But if the damage is 12, then 1 is hardly going to touch the sides in terms of people actually feeling any better. Meantime, interesting polling coming from the Turnbull Times, otherwise known as The Guardian, that shows us here about the government's role and what Australians believe the government's role is when it comes to the variety of issues when it comes to cost of living. Now, again, this government will try to tell you that everything's fine, everything's all right. Well, they say here, how much impact do you think the government has in reducing the following? Well, the best part, pardon me, of 70, almost 80% of people think that health, the government could cut there. Again, about 80% when it comes to energy, they believe the government plays a role in that. The same number when it comes to education, when it comes to housing, mortgages, interest rates, again, 78% of Australians believing the federal government plays a key role in all of that, hence why, if it comes down by one, it is not going to make the difference that the political people will tell you that it's the case. 77% when it comes to transport, and overall when it comes to groceries. It is interesting here that people who believe a large or moderate impact, well, again there you're dealing with more than 65% of people who believe the government has a position to play in those particular areas. So what are Australians looking for? To what extent do you believe, or do you support or oppose the following economic measures? To introduce price caps, and this is frightening, that Australians are so frustrated by the cost of living crisis, which has been exacerbated by a government that, among other things, took money off people, remember, a couple of budgets ago when it came to the low to middle income tax offset. Well, again, you can see the best part there of 70% of people believe that the government could introduce price caps on groceries, rent, energy bills. Pretty much the same when it comes to increasing taxes on big corporations, reducing personal income tax, again, about 65%, fund more social services as some way of dealing with the economy. Again, more than half of people. Run a budget surplus to reduce inflation. Well, it doesn't, but you can see there, again, more than half of people think that's the right thing to do. Raise the level of income support for people who are unemployed. Again, more than 50%. And reduce tax breaks like negative gearing. Now, interestingly here, again, you're looking at a number of more than 50%. So these are in many ways very left-wing proposals as to how to deal with situations, which is why the Prime Minister thinks he's in the right place when it comes to shrinkflation. It's also why the Greens think they're in an even better place, because they will actually suggest some of these things. But a bit of an indication that when pressure has been the way that it has been for as long as it has been, people are willing for any solution, no matter how counterproductive it is to the concept of an open and free market.